Have you ever wondered why women in 19th century photographs look like their bodies are made from completely different biological material? Long, impossibly elongated torsos, waists that seem to defy the laws of anatomy, postures so rigid they appear to be held upright by invisible strings. We're told this was fashion. We're assured that millions of women voluntarily imprison themselves in cages of whalebone and steel, cutting off oxygen and deforming internal organs purely for admiring glances from suitors. But this is a lie. A monstrous, brazen, cynical lie we've been fed since childhood, so we don't ask unnecessary questions about the nature of our own origins. You have been deceived. Everything you know about the Victorian era, about lavish dresses and wasp waists, is a screen hiding a tragedy of planetary scale. Here's a number that should make you stop cold. 40 centimeters. That's the standard waist circumference for a corseted Victorian lady. Now open any modern anatomical atlas. Calculate the volume of a human liver, stomach, intestines, kidneys. Add the space required for the rib cage to expand during breathing. The minimum torso circumference needed to contain these organs? 65 to 70 centimeters. Where did the extra 25 to 30 centimeters disappear to? Where did 2 to 3 liters of internal organs go? Do you seriously believe the liver can be compressed by 40%? Have you ever tried to squeeze a water balloon? It doesn't shrink, it ruptures. But wait until we get to the whale population calculations. Wait until you see what museum corsets contain under spectral analysis. Wait until you understand why peasant women doing backbreaking farm labor also wore these devices. Stop. Ask yourself one simple question. Why would a woman milking cows at dawn, hauling water from a well, scrubbing floors on her knees, harvesting grain in scorching heat, why would she wear a device that makes breathing difficult and bending impossible? Try it yourself right now. Cinch your waist to 45 centimeters and attempt any physical labor. You'll collapse in 10 minutes. This wasn't fashion, this was survival, and what they're hiding is far more terrifying than a quirk of historical vanity. This was emergency medical technology, external structural support for bodies that could no longer stand upright on their own, because something changed. Something fundamental about the environment itself shifted in the mid-19th century, and what we call fashion history is actually a chronicle of a dying race's desperate attempt to remain vertical in a world that had become incompatible with their biology. Turn on your critical thinking. Look at these engravings and daguerreotypes not as fashion magazine pictures, but as engineering blueprints, as evidence of a planetary catastrophe that official history has systematically erased. We're about to count, we're about to calculate, and the numbers will destroy everything you thought you knew. Let's return to those 40 centimeters and actually calculate what fits inside. Walk into any natural history museum, find the human anatomy section. Look at the display showing internal organs at actual size. The liver alone occupies approximately 1,500 cubic centimeters of volume. The stomach, when empty, takes another 500. Add the intestines, 7 meters of tubing that must coil somewhere inside the abdominal cavity, the kidneys, spleen, pancreas, reproductive organs. Now let's turn on the calculator and just count. The most interesting part is just beginning. Write in the comments what city you're from, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. The tension is rising. Who's watching us from where? Drop a like and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come. Mark yourselves in the comments. Which country are you from? Hit that like button and subscribe. The plot thickens. Let's check our geography. Right where you are right now, smash that thumbs up and subscribe. We're just warming up. Tell us, where are you watching from? Support the video with a like and hit that subscribe button. The climax is near. Share what corner of the world you're in right now, drop a like, and make sure to subscribe. Things are developing rapidly. Write your city in the chat, slam that like, and hit subscribe so you don't get lost. All the juiciest stuff is ahead. Let's get acquainted. Who's from where? Hit like and subscribe right now. The intrigue is building right where you're watching this episode from, and reward us with a like and subscription. Emotions are off the charts. Quickly write what city you're from. Drop a fat like and subscribe to the channel. A cylinder with a 40-centimeter circumference has a diameter of roughly 12.7 centimeters. Even accounting for the oval shape of a human torso, we're looking at maximum internal cavity volume of approximately 2,000 to 2,500 cubic centimeters in the corseted section. But the organs we just listed require a minimum of 4,000 to 5,000 cubic centimeters. The math doesn't work. It physically cannot work. Where did the extra 2 to 3 liters of biological matter disappear to? Did the liver shrink? Did intestines somehow compress to half their length? Did kidneys flatten like pancakes? Do you seriously believe human organs are compressible? They're not. They're filled with fluid, tissue, blood vessels. Compress them beyond a certain threshold and they rupture, they hemorrhage, they fail catastrophically. It's like trying to fit a full-size engine into a toy car chassis. The components don't scale down. They don't compress. They either fit or they don't. But here's what makes this truly impossible. Victorian women didn't just wear corsets for photographs. They wore them 8 to 12 hours daily. Some accounts claim women slept in modified versions. This wasn't occasional compression. This was permanent structural modification of the torso. Any modern surgeon will tell you what happens when you chronically compress the abdominal cavity. Organs migrate. The liver gets pushed upward against the diaphragm, the stomach distends, the intestines prolapse downward into the pelvic cavity. Breathing becomes shallow because the lungs cannot fully expand. Yet we're told these women lived normal lives, bore 10 children, performed household labor, danced at balls. Really? Try this right now. Exhale completely and hold your breath. Feel that pressure in your chest, that desperate need for your ribcage to expand. Now imagine that's your permanent state for 12 hours daily. Either these women had completely different internal anatomy, smaller organs, collapsible structures, fundamentally alien biology, or they weren't the same species we are. There's no third option. This is not a fashion mystery. This is anatomical evidence that something about human physiology was radically different in the 19th century. Or that the bodies in those photographs required external structural support because their internal architecture was collapsing. But organ displacement is just the beginning. The scariest part is what this compression did to the skeletal system. And when you see the structural engineering calculations, you'll understand why they physically couldn't stand upright without that external cage. Shift your gaze from the organs to the skeleton itself, because what happens to the spine under sustained compression is where this investigation takes a turn that no official historian will touch. The human spine is a load-bearing column. It's engineered, and by evolution, by nature, by whatever force you believe in, to handle specific loads under specific gravitational conditions. Every vertebra, every disc, every supporting ligament is calibrated to one particular environment. Now let's turn on the calculator. A human spine under normal conditions supports approximately 60 to 80 kilograms of body weight. That's the baseline load it evolved to manage. If gravitational force increases by just 10 to 15%, not dramatically, not catastrophically, just a modest 10 to 15%, the effective load on every vertebra increases by 6 to 12 kilograms permanently, every second of every day, while standing, while breathing, while sleeping. That's like strapping a loaded backpack to your skeleton that you can never remove, ever. What does sustained overload do to a structural column? Any engineer will answer immediately. It compresses, it buckles, it fails. Not suddenly, gradually. Over months and years, the discs thin, the vertebrae deform, the entire column shortens and curves. How is this possible to survive without external support? It isn't, not without an external structural framework holding the column upright and distributing the load across a rigid external shell. Not without, say, a cage of steel and whalebone laced tightly around the torso, transferring gravitational stress from the collapsing biological column to an engineered external structure. We call that a corset. Try this right now. Stand completely upright, shoulders back, spine fully extended for 8 consecutive hours without leaning, sitting, or shifting weight. Most people's lower backs begin screaming within 2 hours. We consider this normal. We call it bad posture or weak core muscles. What if it isn't weakness? What if our spines are genuinely incompatible with the gravitational load of this planet? Animals don't develop spinal degeneration the way humans do. Wild animals don't need physiotherapy. Gorillas don't complain of chronic lower back pain. If we evolved here naturally over millions of years, our skeleton would be perfectly calibrated for this exact gravity. But it isn't. The epidemic is universal, and it begins at exactly the age when accumulated gravitational damage becomes impossible to compensate through muscle strength alone. Either our species evolved somewhere with lighter gravitational conditions and was transplanted here, or something changed in our environment within historical memory. There's no third option. This is not a medical curiosity. This is structural evidence of a biological mismatch between our bodies and this planet, and we haven't even reached the production numbers yet. When you see how many of these external skeletons were supposedly manufactured, and by whom, the ground disappears from under your feet entirely. And here we approach the most staggering fact of all, and one that historians glide past with remarkable speed, hoping you won't stop to do the arithmetic. Take the census data from 1880. The combined female population of Europe and North America at that point stood at approximately 150 to 200 million people. Every adult woman wore a corset, not occasionally, not for special occasions, daily. This is documented, photographed, written about exhaustively in diaries, medical records, fashion publications. Now let's turn on the calculator and just count. A single corset requires between 3 and 5 days of skilled labor to produce. Precision stitching along dozens of channels, hand setting of eyelets, typically 20 to 30 per garment, insertion of individual boning strips, attachment of clasps and lacing hardware. This isn't rough sewing. This is closer to watchmaking than tailoring. Corsets also wear out. Under daily use and repeated lacing tension, they lasted approximately 2 to 3 years before requiring replacement. So 150 million corsets replaced every 2.5 years on average. That's 60 million new corsets needed every single year. At 4 days of skilled labor per corset, that's 240 million labor days annually. Divide by 250 working days per year. You need 960,000 full-time skilled corset makers working every day of the year, producing nothing else to meet this demand. Nearly 1 million specialized craftspeople, exclusively, permanently. I know what you're thinking right now. Cottage industry, home sewing, small workshops scattered across every village. Fine, do that math yourself. 1 million skilled workers represents the entire adult working population of a city the size of Birmingham or Lyon, doing nothing but sewing corsets every day for decades. Where are they in census records? Where are the guild registries? Where are the supply chains for their materials? The steel for the stays, the brass for the eyelets, the specialized fabrics? They don't exist in any economic report we've been shown. It's like claiming every household in Europe owned a handcrafted Swiss watch, but there's no record of watchmakers, no workshops, no apprenticeship records, no raw material imports. The watches exist in museums. The production infrastructure is simply absent. Either this manufacturing apparatus existed and was systematically erased from every historical record simultaneously across dozens of countries, or these garments came from somewhere else entirely. There's no third option. This is not a gap in the historical record. This is evidence of deliberate erasure. The objects exist. The means to produce them at the required scale do not. But production capacity is just one layer of this impossibility. The raw materials tell an even more damning story, and the numbers there don't just strain credibility, they annihilate it. The raw materials tell an even more damning story. Let's calculate our way to the conclusion that official history absolutely refuses to reach. Take whalebone, the primary structural material in Victorian corsets. Museum placards describe it confidently. Baleen strips harvested from filter-feeding whales flexible yet rigid, perfect for shaping garments. The official story is tidy, logical, complete, until you count the wales. Each corset contains between 20 and 30 individual baleen strips. A single large wale yields approximately 300 usable strips, meaning one wale provides the boning material for roughly 10 to 15 corsets. That sounds manageable, until we return to our 60 million corsets needed annually. Let's turn on the calculator one more time. 60 million corsets divided by 12 corsets per wale equals 5 million wales required every single year. Every year, not total, per year. How many whales existed in all the world's oceans at the peak of Victorian whaling? Marine biologists working from historical whaling logs, the actual records that do exist, estimate the total global population across all species at approximately 2 to 3 million animals. We needed to exterminate the entire global whale population twice over, annually, for 60 years of the Victorian era. Do you seriously believe the oceans could sustain that? They couldn't. Mathematically, biologically, physically, impossible. Yet whales didn't go extinct. They're still here. Populations were stressed by Victorian whaling, yes, devastated in some regions, but they survived, which means the material in those museum corsets labeled _3_s wasn't whale. And here is where this investigation crosses into territory that makes the hair on your arms stand up, because those museum specimens have been examined. The molecular structure of the so-called whalebone in surviving Victorian corsets doesn't consistently match any known organic material from marine mammals. Some samples resist standard spectral analysis entirely. The composition is recorded as _4_ in conservation notes, unidentified in the 21st century. With our technology, it's like finding a medieval knight's armor that turns out to be made of titanium alloy. The object exists, the label is attached, but the material is simply not what they claim. We'll return to these unidentified materials when the full picture becomes clear, because what they're actually composed of changes everything about what these garments really were. Remember this detail, it matters enormously. Either quote 5 was a deliberate misdirection, a label applied to materials whose true origin had to be concealed, or someone made a catastrophic error in every museum catalog simultaneously across dozens of countries. There's no third option. This is not a labeling mistake. This is evidence of systematic concealment of what these devices were actually made from, and why that origin had to be hidden. If the previous evidence strained credibility, what the medical records show will shatter it completely. Open any 19th century medical encyclopedia, not a fashion history book, not a cultural study, but actual clinical documentation from practicing physicians. What you find isn't quaint superstition. What you find is a systematic, continent-wide medical emergency documented with clinical precision across thousands of patient records. The diagnosis appears everywhere. Quote 6, quote 7, quote 8. We're told these diagnoses reflect the ignorance of pre-modern medicine. Historians smile condescendingly and explain that Victorian doctors simply didn't understand female anatomy, inventing phantom conditions to explain hystria and feminine weakness, textbook fairy tales for people who don't read the actual source documents. Do you really think that physicians who performed precise surgical procedures, who documented anatomical structures with extraordinary accuracy in illustrated encyclopedias, who developed anesthesia and antiseptic technique, suddenly became illiterate when observing their most common female patients? The answer is obvious. They weren't confused. They were accurately documenting what they saw. Zoom in on the medical illustrations from the 1860s and 1870s. See the anatomical drawings showing uterine displacement, descended organs, compressed rib structures pressing downward into the abdominal cavity. Now zoom out. This documentation appears in British medical journals, French clinical records, German anatomical studies, American physician reports, simultaneously, universally. This wasn't regional pathology. This was a species-wide emergency. The wandering womb, dismissed as superstition, describes organs literally descending under gravitational load. The pelvic floor wasn't engineered to resist. Not psychological weakness, mechanical failure. The body's internal structures migrating downward because the force pulling them down had increased beyond the biological threshold for containment, and the corset provided upward compression, counteracting that descent, holding organs in positions they could no longer maintain independently. Who in their right mind designs a fashion accessory that specifically counteracts organ prolapse? Who engineers decorative steel stays calibrated to provide precisely the upward abdominal pressure needed to keep a displaced uterus from descending further? A fashion designer? Or a medical engineer responding to a physiological crisis? It's like finding that ancient _quote_12 copper bracelets worn universally across a civilization turn out to be precisely calibrated electromagnetic shielding devices. The label says ornament. The engineering says survival technology. Either Victorian physicians across a dozen countries simultaneously fabricated identical false diagnoses for no discernible reason, or they were documenting a real widespread biological collapse that required mechanical intervention to manage. There's no third option. This is not historical curiosity. This is clinical evidence of a population in physiological crisis requiring external mechanical support to function. But the scariest part isn't even this. The scariest part is what happened to reproduction, because the fertility numbers from this same period make everything we've discussed so far look like a minor inconsistency. Let's return to the fertility numbers, because this is where the official story doesn't just crack, it collapses entirely. Here is the paradox that no historian will place in the same paragraph, because doing so destroys the entire narrative. Chronic mechanical compression of the pelvic region, sustained daily pressure on reproductive structures for 8 to 12 hours, causes measurable reduction in reproductive capacity. This isn't controversial. Any gynecologist will confirm it without hesitation. Yet Victorian families averaged 8 to 12 children. The population of Europe grew from approximately 200 million in 1800 to over 400 million by 1900, a doubling in 1 century, during a documented continent-wide fertility crisis caused by the very devices every woman wore daily. Do you feel this dissonance? Let's turn on the calculator. A woman bearing 10 children across a reproductive lifespan, accounting for pregnancy intervals, faces roughly 90 to 100 months of pregnancy alone, nearly 8 years. Add nursing periods, add the documented pelvic deformation caused by tight lacing that Victorian physicians recorded as making natural delivery increasingly dangerous with each successive birth. The biology simply doesn't stack up. You thought that was the full impossibility? No, we haven't even started yet. Because simultaneously, in the same cities, during the same decades, while families supposedly produced 10 children each, orphanages were exploding beyond all capacity to explain. London alone operated over 50 major institutional orphanages by 1880, each housing between 500 and 1,000 children. That's up to 50,000 parentless children in a single city, not foundlings left on doorsteps. Institutions purpose-built at enormous expense, staffed, supplied, administered, appearing across every major European and American city within the same 30-year window. Where did they come from? If families were producing 10 children each, orphanages should have been shrinking, not multiplying. Extended family networks would absorb parentless children as they always had throughout human history. Instead, we see massive institutional infrastructure appearing simultaneously across an entire civilization. It's like finding hundreds of enormous warehouses appearing in every city simultaneously, all filled with identical unclaimed goods, and being told this is simply the result of people misplacing their shopping. Either birth records across an entire civilization were systematically falsified to create the illusion of natural population growth, or these children arrived through a mechanism that official history has no framework to accommodate. There's no third option. This is not a social welfare footnote. This is demographic evidence of population replacement. New inhabitants introduced into a civilization whose original occupants were diminishing faster than any natural birth rate could explain. And when you see what the buildings of that civilization were actually designed for, you'll understand exactly who those original occupants were. Shift your gaze entirely from documents and medical records to the physical structures still standing around us, because the architecture of the 19th century contains evidence you can measure yourself today with a tape measure and your own body. Walk into any Victorian building that hasn't been renovated, a genuine one, a train station, a courthouse, a manor house, a municipal hall. Don't read the placard. Don't listen to the guide. Just look. The door handles sit at your shoulder height, not your hand height, your shoulder. Standard Victorian interior door hardware is mounted at 140 to 150 centimeters from the floor. For that placement to be ergonomically natural, the way we instinctively position handles at hip height, the occupant's hip would need to sit at 140 to 150 centimeters. That means a standing height of approximately 220 to 250 centimeters, 2.5 meters, comfortably. We're told building standards were simply different. Architectural conventions varied. Do you seriously believe that every architect across Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and America simultaneously adopted handle placement that made their buildings ergonomically useless for the people living in them? Architecture follows the body. Always has. Always will. Now look at the ground level. Take any historic building in a European city center, Vienna, Paris, St. Petersburg, Prague. The _13_ windows begin at modern street level or below it. The actual ground floor is buried. Historians call this the _14_ gradual accumulation of soil, debris, and settlement over centuries. Let's turn on the calculator. In cities like St. Petersburg, the buried depth averages 3 to 4 meters. The city was founded in 1703. That's approximately 320 years ago. Simple division. 3.5 meters divided by 320 years equals 1.1 centimeters of accumulation per year. That's not gradual settlement. That's not centuries of dropped litter. 1 centimeter per year of material appearing across entire city surfaces simultaneously represents a catastrophic deposition event, with material arriving suddenly, burying existing ground floors, and then stabilizing. One event, not centuries of gradual drift. It's like finding the ground floor of your house buried under 3 meters of sand and being told it accumulated from people not sweeping their doorsteps. We see door handles designed for beings 250 centimeters tall. We see ground floors buried under catastrophic material deposition. We see staircase risers at heights uncomfortable for modern legs. We see ceiling heights of 4 to 5 meters in ordinary domestic buildings. These structures were not built for us. Either the architects of a dozen nations simultaneously designed buildings ergonomically wrong for their own population, or these buildings were constructed by and for inhabitants significantly larger than we are. There's no third option. This is not architectural variation. This is physical evidence of a previous civilization whose dimensions we don't match. And now, finally, we're ready to discuss what happened to them. Now we assemble the pieces. Every clue we've examined, the anatomical impossibility, the production paradox, the whale extinction math, the medical emergency, the demographic replacement, the buried buildings, they don't describe separate mysteries. They describe one event, a planetary catastrophe, mid-19th century, sudden, catastrophic, and deliberately erased from everything they teach us. Here is what the evidence actually describes when you stop accepting the official labels and read what the numbers say. Something changed the gravitational and atmospheric conditions of this planet within a historically narrow window, decades, not millennia. The buried city floors recorded a massive deposition event, material arriving suddenly across continental surfaces, raising ground level by 3 to 4 meters within a time frame too short for gradual accumulation, not centuries of settlement, one event. And that event changed everything for the beings living through it. The tall race, the ones whose proportions fit those door handles, whose elongated torsos appear in early daguerreotypes, whose buildings we still inhabit like children wearing adult clothing. Their biology was calibrated for different conditions: lighter gravitational load, different atmospheric density, a world their spines and organs were engineered for. Then the conditions shifted, and their bodies began failing. The spines compressed under the new gravitational load. The organs descended, no longer held in position by the pressure differential their biology expected. Breathing became labored as atmospheric density changed beyond what their lung capacity was designed to process. The mass fainting epidemics documented throughout the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, not corset side effects, atmospheric incompatibility. Their lungs genuinely couldn't process the new air. The corset was the emergency response, developed not by fashion designers but by whatever engineering minds remained functional in the crisis. Steel stays capable of withstanding several atmospheres of pressure, not decorative, load-bearing, transferring gravitational stress from a collapsing biological column to a rigid external framework. The crinolines and elaborate skirt structures weren't fashion excess. They were counterbalance mechanisms, redistributing weight for bodies whose center of gravity had shifted as their spines compressed and shortened. Every element of Victorian dress was functional survival engineering. None of it was decoration. Look at the photographic record with this understanding. Early daguerreotypes from the 1840s show the tallest, most elongated figures. The original population still standing but already requiring support. By the 1880s, the figures are shorter, the corsets more universal, the original race increasingly absent from the frame. It's like watching a species disappear across 4 decades of photographs, replaced gradually by shorter, denser figures who wear the same external devices, not because they need them, but because they're imitating a technology they inherited without understanding. Either this transition happened exactly as the evidence describes, or every category of evidence we've examined is simultaneously, coincidentally, wrong. There's no third option. And what replaced them and what we are is the most disturbing